Hey man, how's it going?
Hey, Palsteron. Thanks a lot for having me here. It's going great.
Hell yeah. Today we have Surgeon General here, which is a fellow YouTube content creator specializing in what I would say is very interesting mechanics. So, first up, what I really like about your channel is that you don't pick stuff that people want to see. I feel like you pick it exactly the opposite. It's like you pick stuff that people don't even know exists, which is for a creator, like you're like a really good resource for other creators and creative people. So I absolutely love your channel. That's why I wanted to have you on. And yeah, just wanted to say that. And yeah, welcome, dude.
Hey, thanks a lot. That's like the best compliment I could receive because I mean, I'm not a professional YouTuber. I'm not a streamer. This is like a labor of love, and I do it because I find it interesting and I want to share like the weird stuff that I find in this game. I play this game almost exclusively. I've played a lot of different builds, and I'm like constantly in forums and stuff. So this is just an avenue for me to share the random stuff that I come across and ends up working in game. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't work, that doesn't
work,
end
yeah.
up in a video.
Yeah, I mean, if everything worked, then you aren't daring enough, right?
Yeah.
Basically, yeah. So in terms of like what kind of niche you occupy, can you kind of explain what you like to do? What are you passionate about in PoE?
Yeah, sure. So like I'm an engineer by trade, right? And Path of Exile is like this deeply complex game. There's like a lot of min-maxing that you can do in Path of Building, but beyond that, there's a level of character design that you just can't solve in Path of Building alone. So I have a few videos about lucky spell suppression, and I think Marlene's fallacy is a good example. That like there are correct ways, like objectively correct ways to use some uniques. That is an optimization problem that ends up going very deep. And so I like to dive into that kind of stuff. For example, this league, something that hasn't made it to the channel yet, I'm starting to work on a Firestorm of Pelting build. There's a lot of moving parts to it, but Firestorm of Pelting is a really interesting skill because there's two radiuses associated with the skill. You have the size of the storm itself, and then the meteors that fall in it have a size themselves. But there's no guarantee that the meteor in the storm is going to hit the enemy that you're aiming at. So there's a really interesting optimization problem with area of effect, because if you scale the size of the meteors, you're also scaling the size of the storm. And so
yeah, you have this problem, right? Like this is the old Firestorm problem. It's like the enemy hitbox always stays the same. So basically, the more AoE you get, the bigger your explosions inside the Firestorm, but also the bigger the circumference of where they can land, right?
Exactly.
The problem is, since the hitbox of the enemy stays the same, the more AoE is usually the worse. It's not always exactly true, but that has been an issue for a lot of skills, right? Like Ice Storm, even normal Firestorm, how it was back in the day before it got changed.
Exactly.
Yeah, even Molten Strike, right? But with like increased projectile speed, reduced projectile speed, and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. So you look at a problem like that, just as one example, and then you say like, oh, okay, so clearly the answer must be like, oh, I want to get reduced AoE from Kalandra. Well, but then what are you going to do for map clear, right? That's fine if you're building a one-trick pony boss killer, right? You can get great single target, but if you want to actually run a map with it, it's a little harder to do.
I feel like the best skills are usually the ones that actually both go in the same direction. There's always a problem I had with skills like Ice Storm or Firestorm or whatever. It's like solving for those issues usually means the skill will end up being too bad. And it's like, the same is true for Explosive Trap, by the way, and it always kind of was, right? Where it's just a really good skill, but whenever you have a skill where if you scale AoE, it's actually a downside, that's when you don't get a good all-rounder ever, I feel like.
Right.
Yeah. And I don't feel like the solution is like doing a gem swap, right? Like conk AoE. That's some old school stuff you don't want to do nowadays anymore, right?
It's funny you bring that up. On my league starter that I've been playing this league, I've been doing an amulet swap for bosses, right? So like,
okay,
some people have the stomach for that, and some people don't. And you know, I do not plan on making a guide for my current character because I know that just like it's just a non-starter for a lot of people, right? They don't want to have to swap out a gear piece when they go into a boss arena.
Understandable. I guess for me personally, I don't know about you, it's like the higher my investment, the less threshold for pain I have. It's like if I put mirrors into my build, I don't want it to have that much friction. But on League Start, I'm willing to sacrifice comfiness.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah. And the reason you don't want to invest is because, like, I don't know, I view my League starters as stepping stones, right? I want to play something for a week or two so that I can have the currency to try weirder builds, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So you're very analytical. You very much, you talked about how there's a right way to do things. How can you kind of marry that with the idea of still having fun in a game? Do you often get this thing where, I often get this where it's like min-maxing the fun out of something, which is like, for me, is a little bit of an oxymoron. It's like, no, that's where I derive the fun from, right? For me, it's very often, I make the build and then I just go through the motions. That's playing the game.
I think I've experienced that too. Like, I joke with my buddies that, like, are we playing Path of Exile today or are we playing Path of Building today, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's almost like two different games. You've got on the Path of Building days, like you're doing that rigorous optimization. But then when you actually launch the game and play the character, like, for the most part, you can turn your brain off from the game, at least. And like, I know for myself, when I'm running through a map, I'm thinking about, like, the other character that I'm planning, right? I'm not thinking about what I'm playing right now. I'm thinking about what's to come on another character. And that's where you, like, end up finding some of these weird niche interactions.
It's a weird dynamic though, right? Because a lot of the things that you test out, you can't just like test out in PoE, like you said earlier. You actually have to go into the game. What's like more fun for you, like theorizing about builds or actually going in and doing the work?
I definitely like the theory. People talk a lot about target dummies in Path of Exile, and while I don't necessarily think that it would be a good addition to the game, because then people are just going to optimize, like you said, optimize the fun out of it. They just want to see the target dummy number go up. Testing in Path of Exile is, like, extraordinarily hard because like, you're going to end up in Blood Aqueducts, re-rolling the zone, looking for a blue pack with life regen, and you're taking all your gems out and setting yourself up to only do elemental damage with a level 1 cold skill. Like, because we don't have something like a target dummy, it's really hard to do that testing. But when you find something new, it can be really rewarding.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if we even want a target dummy, because I feel like we would find so many bugs. I think we would almost be disheartened.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure.
You almost don't want to open that Pandora's box, right?
No. I think it's best sealed, right? You don't just like do ideas. You also package them within builds, right? Like, we have a lot of creators, like, for example, Wolfio, which I like to watch a lot, who just does goofy ideas, but then maybe the actually putting it into a build is like where the idea dies, kind of. Do you have like a toolbox where you have like a lot of builds that you would like to work, and every time patch notes come out, you kind of like check if there's something new for them, or how do you usually approach that?
I have a few ideas. I mean, after the Chieftain rework, Chieftains become kind of my workhorse for, like, wacky builds, because the ascendancy points solve so many problems. You get your resists and max resists taken care of. You're buy a bunch of chunky life wheels. You're like 4 travel points away from the fire damage mastery that gives you regen. There's just a lot to like about Chieftain, and like all of a sudden you have all of your gear suffixes opened up for like whatever you want, right? I use Chieftain a lot for like wacky interactions where I actually want to put it into a build, but no, I don't have like a drag and drop templates for characters.
So you kind of like go league by league, sort of. Yeah.
I think the one exception to that, I saw you playing some of the videos from my brand recall characters, and that was like there was a natural evolution over like 3 leagues where I found this like trigger bot interaction with brand recall that, I started with Eye of Winter and I played that pretty extensively for 2 leagues, and then it ended up turning into a minion based build. Still using the same interactions.
The falling zombies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like the problem with the Eye of Winter trigger bot build was that you have the 2 pretty severe less damage multipliers that, like, I mean, anything can be solved with enough currency, and that's what I ended up doing in those builds, is like it was hundreds of divines to just get your damage up to overcome those less damage multipliers. But those end up not applying to minion skills. So Raised Zombies of Falling were not affected by the less damage multipliers.
Yep. I mean, which is really nice. But on the other hand, I guess the downside is that a lot of stuff that would affect normal builds doesn't affect it, right? So
yeah,
it's kind of like
you end up having to jump
take.
through hoops to get minion damage to scale your crit, right? Yeah. Yeah. But that's why those Path of Building days are fun, right? You figure out how you can get around that problem.
Yeah. So I guess talking about like, because we already talked about like builds that are jack of all trades. What do you think about the current landscape of builds where people want these all-rounders, and at best they should cost like 10 divines, don't die in tier 17s, do like, I don't know, hundreds of millions of damage. What's like the expectation? How do you like approach that?
I've got a couple thoughts about that. I mean, I started playing Path of Exile like 6 to 8 years ago. Back then, you used to build characters for a specific type of content, right? You would have boss rushers, right? Where you would just run to the end of the map as fast as you could, kill the boss, and go next, right? In 30 seconds. Or you just have like map zoomers that might not even do the map boss, right? You're just going to blast through as many legions as you can. Yeah. But I think what really changed it was tier 17 maps, and the way the meta has shifted around tier 17 maps. The Uber boss keys are so valuable that like you're heavily incentivized to kill the boss at the end of the T17 map. But the explicit modifiers on T17s are so insane.
Yeah.
That you can pull 4 divs of scarabs out of, like on average, out of a T17 map. So why wouldn't you kill the mobs along the way, right? So that kind of necessitates these jack of all trade characters in modern PoE, and you know, for better or for worse, I'm not the one who decides the design.
I wonder if it was like a bad idea, because I was a proponent for a long time of kind of removing quantity, as I said already, and then introducing harder gameplay to reward people with good builds. But I guess the flip side of that is it feels like for a lot of people, they're completely now detached from the actual end game, which is now tier 17. Everybody could run tier 16s, right? It's like, sure, if you're a very passionate player, at some point you're kind of stuck at tier 16s and you can't really go further. Now those players can go further, but a lot of people that were stuck at tier 16s before now can't progress, and they feel like they're kind of being excluded from the actual end game, which is so much more rewarding. I mean, there's still tier 16, but like tier 17 maps are ridiculously rewarding as well, even before the boss, right?
Yeah, I think there still needs to be some tuning, and I'm not sure I like having the Uber keys locked behind tier 17s. If it were my decision to make, I think I would have given it the Uber Elder treatment, right? Where you give fragments to the base bosses. But
they probably didn't just want it to be another Guardian situation where, oh, you kill these 4 things and then you get to the next boss. They wanted to actually, like, I guess, like, implement it a little bit more, like, I don't know, naturally, maybe? I don't know. I think the main issue is currently that there's a more multiplier on like currency maps and scarabs on those maps, which I don't really understand because they're already so rewarding. They're just
so insanely rewarding. Yeah. That leads to the other part of the question, is that just like the T17 maps are simply harder, right? And so you need to have builds that have a lot more defenses than you needed in T16s, right? Or you'll just get one shot by every blue pack in the map. That has kind of led to like an exclusivity problem in the community, I think, in the build making community. Like,
yeah,
you know, if your build does not have 20k fizz max hit, like people are just going to look next.
It's definitely weird because I don't think most people who don't actually make the builds they play understand how much investment and how much damage you have to sacrifice to get to those numbers, and how often in some archetypes it's not even worth going for because your build would be dysfunctional.
Yeah, I'm a softcore player, right? I've only played hardcore in the Gauntlet. Everybody in softcore gets 6 portals. And like, I think they should be viewed as a resource, like your skill points, right? Like your gear slots. Your 6 portals are a resource. I don't think there's anything wrong with taking a death every 3rd map in order to go 30% faster. or do
Yeah.
30% more damage, you know?
That's like an efficiency versus comfiness, right? Like,
Exactly.
for example, I actually don't like dying every third map, and it's like I try to build in a way where, but I also feel disconnected a lot of the times where I feel like people need these numbers like 20,000 max fizz hit or even before guard skill, right? And then even more just to do tier 16s and very easy content, whereas I'm usually happy with a lot less, and I don't think I'm particularly like mechanically good, so I don't really know. I feel like some people just love standing inside of stuff, maybe.
I mean, it's definitely
really
impressive, right? It's impressive to stand in the Firestorm. You like that is a cool character.
Yeah, yeah.
But you don't
Or
need
like
it for
showing off with
T16
Aegis,
mapping.
right? Talking about defenses though, like, do you feel like there is a big obsession with numbers, not just in terms of DPS, which we remember the times where my pet peeve always used to be that people chase damage numbers too much. Because back in the day, tier 16s were kind of like the ceiling, and after 1, 2, 3 million damage, I remember it was basically useless to stack more. You're better off just being faster, have more AoE or stuff like that. But times have completely shifted. Do you feel like there's now more of like a leaning towards defensive stats and maybe a little bit of an overcompensation?
There's definitely a desire for more, I mean, for more defenses. I think that the offensive scaling has also just gone crazy. I mean, we used to measure in like shapers per second was like a term that got thrown around in the old day. Yeah. But now like people are talking like billions of damage. There are builds that like people are measuring in billions of damage, which is just insane to me. It's also like overkill. But yeah, on the defensive side, I think a lot of it comes down to a misconception about defensive requirements in PoE, and like you have like one group of people that look at effective hit points, right? Which is just an entirely misleading stat, and I just think people don't understand that like it depends on what is configured, what the enemy configuration is, right? Like you can configure it for a white mob in Act 1, and like you have infinite HP, or you can configure it against Maven brain slams, and you know every build looks silly. If you start digging deeper into builds and understanding like, oh, okay, this character has 100% crit reduction. Like, oh, maybe he doesn't need as big of a fizz max hit, because there aren't that many things that actually do 18k fizz hit without a crit in the game, right?
Yep.
So like that's
exact my experience.
That's why they're called defensive layers, you know? Like the layer, you don't, if you have more layers, you don't need each layer to be as big.
This is a thing I told people a lot, is like I play a lot of right side builds, and there's other creators looking at my builds and they're like, this is too squishy, and I just have a completely different perspective when it comes to, for example, fizz max hit if I'm crit immune, exactly like you just said. It's like on poison builds I'm crit immune. It is what it is. So I feel comfortable on like 10k. Now 7k, 8k, that's stupid, right? 10k, I feel basically immune, right? With a lot of evasion and stuff like that. I feel like the thing with effective hit pool is people don't understand that you need both, right? You always need everything. There's never a build where it's like, unless you have like sure, if you're a Sanctum runner, right, you just go all in on avoidance, that's fine. But in general, at some point, so for example, if you have a Svalin setup, you probably don't want to go for 90% evasion, right? It's like, makes no sense. Because at some point, you're like, okay, I filtered out 90% of hits. I don't need to filter out half of that as well, right? I would rather not die to those 10%. But on the other hand, for example, hardcore players will say, which is true in hardcore, right? It's true in hardcore that effective hit pool is not as important. It's almost not negligible, but it is a big deal to have max hit. But on softcore, if you have 90% damage avoidance, basically, with like elusive, with evasion, with whatever, with like a little bit of block, it often feels like you're actually immune, because it's not like the 5% of hits that come through actually one-shot you. Those could still be small hits, right? So it's like, it feels like you're basically immune on softcore. And if you couple that with what you said about it's fine to die, I mean, for some people, it's going to be every 3 maps. For me, it's maybe every 50 maps. For some others, it's like every 100 maps. Then you can get so much more damage and so much more movement speed, so much more AoE into your build and make it feel so much more better.
I think one thing that perfectly demonstrates that point is like if anybody watching has a character that takes what's the keystone that makes it so you can't evade but you're not stunned on the bottom left.
Oh, unwavering stance.
Yeah. You have a character with unwavering stance, just try running a map with that on and off and seeing what the difference is. Like, you might feel tankier with it off.
It's crazy. I say this all the time. Like, there's so many left side builds. If they just run a Jade Flask with evasion suffix, they get like 40% evasion.
Yeah.
It's like night and day.
And if you have a decent amount of armor, like 40k evasion, like it makes such a difference, right? Because it gives your recovery more time to take over. Like,
it's wild. Yeah. There's definitely a huge difference. Yeah. In terms of build diversity, how do you feel like this league has been doing so far?
Apart from the problem that we talked about on T17s, where like the general build requirements from the community are just higher, it feels like we got the melee rework that we needed for a long time, right?
Yeah, I mean, Lightning Strike needed a buff, clearly. Yeah. Super happy.
In general, I think that was great for build diversity because it was starting to feel like everything was, top right side of the tree, either bows or spell based, and it's good to see some ascendancies that haven't gotten a lot of attention come back into the light.
Yeah. Actually, I think it's funny that you said melee, because if we talk about real melee skills like slams, they have actually been losing out quite a bit. Because I don't know why, but they decided to buff Lightning Strike, Molten Strike, and Frostblades, which were already playable.
The three that were already played, right?
I don't get it. And it's not like they buffed it a little bit and the rest really hard. They buffed Lightning Strike by over double. And like, they thought, for some reason, they thought taking away the flat damage was a good compensation, when in most endgame builds, you already cheese flat damage.
Yeah.
With like strength stacking or in-stacking or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't get it. And then they also give us like double damage on two-handed swords, or I don't know, insane enchants. So it's like, yeah, returning proj on two-handed swords, right? Like all of that stuff. It's kind of wild how I think they accidentally stumbled into good build diversity, at least in my opinion, but it's not because of melee.
Yeah, I think part of it is just like people don't like playing up close and personal builds in current Path of Exile where like one-shots are the way you die. You'd much rather stand on the other side of the screen and have projectiles that clear everything.
Yeah.
I think like the only true melee build on that list there is Frostblades of Catabasis, and that whole gimmick is that you have screen wide melee strike.
Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah, Cyclone, I guess we have Cyclone here. We have Flicker Strike, which is very much, but Flicker Strike is like that's like a meta pick, right? It's not necessarily a strong skill. It's just super comfy. So people make it work, and they just throw mirrors at it, which is...
Yeah, Flicker Strike enjoyers just are going to play Flicker Strike no matter what the current state of Flicker Strike is.
Exactly. So people played Flicker Strike last league. They will always play Flicker Strike got buffed by double. I was actually surprised. I thought they would buff it less, but Flicker Strike definitely one of the biggest winners this league. It's actually now in a situation where you're actually not memeing anymore, right? Like, even if you don't play a mirror tier Flicker, you actually do damage.
What I'm expecting, though, next league is like a pretty specific tuning of the overperforming melee skills or melee tagged skills from this league, right?
Tagged skills,
it feels like they just across the board buffed any skill with the melee tag, and come next league, I'm expecting them to fine-tune the numbers to bring everything else in line.
I think that slams are almost there. I think the biggest issue for slams is that whenever defenses get nerfed, it's like it affects it the hardest as well. For example, Fizz taking S and whatnot. Whereas, Lightning Strike's going to get adjusted, Molten Strike's going to get adjusted, we all know. So this is one of the things that I always said. I said, like, the discrepancy between good skills and bad skills is so crazy in this game. And people were like, it's not that bad. But isn't it funny that they buffed all melee skills by like double, and Ice Nova Frostbolts or like Mana Stackers are still like as good, if not better? It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Hex Blast. I mean,
there's just so much comfiness to those builds, I think is what it comes down to. You know, for how easy they are to play, they perform extremely well. I'm not the type of player that like only wants to press one button. I kind of like piano builds. I like having a skill rotation.
okay.
But I think the vast majority of the community wants to press like my main skill button and my main skill button alone, right? And so those builds kind of, they automate all of the other processes of the build to work around only pressing right click and move.
Okay, so regarding builds, PoE 1, seems like you're pretty passionate about PoE 1. Are you passionate about GGG in general, like what they come out with? Do you think they have a good approach to gaming? Are you also hyped about what PoE 2 is going to become, or are you kind of like a little bit skeptical like a lot of the PoE 1 community?
I'm a huge fan of ARPGs in general, and I think Path of Exile is currently the pinnacle of ARPGs that are available. I don't think it's a coincidence that GGG made it, right? Like they at some level they know what they're doing enough to put out a great game. What excites me about PoE 2 is that it is going to be different, and like the gameplay is probably going to feel, I don't want to say slower because we're getting a very specific subset from the media that they're putting out. Like we're getting campaign videos basically. My characters look very different in Act 2 than they do in red maps. So like I don't expect what we've seen so far to be indicative of the end game in PoE 2, but I like that they're setting you up to have skill rotations, right? The design around having, you know, half a dozen 6-links is exciting to me because it means you're going to have damage skills, you're going to have support skills, you're going to have like recovery skills, and that's the kind of gameplay that I like. So yeah, I'm excited for that. I haven't had any exposure to PoE 2, so for me,
I haven't either. So yeah,
okay,
yeah,
all going to be fresh in November.
I think it's cool that people who are mechanically gifted actually get something to do in PoE now, where they might actually push ahead. It's not just thinkers, it's also doers, right? Like people who actually are just good at mechanics.
Yeah.
But also going back to your thing, I don't think GGG just stumbled into this game. I think they have not just a formula, it's like a very basic understanding of what makes these games fun. And I think if they're experimenting, there's almost only good things that come out of it. And even if it is, let's say, bad on release or whatever we deem as bad, I don't think there is a way they would not steer after a few leaks into something that's good again. Because I remember the same thing happening to PoE 1. Like PoE 1 at the start was not a very good game. I didn't play since beta, but I started like a year or 1.5 years after beta. And like what it has become nowadays is just fascinating. So people who are like really concerned about what it currently is, I'm not really concerned what it currently is because I know that it will be something maybe in a year from now or 2 years from now, right?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of doubters in November after the open beta and before release. And like probably justifiably so. Even in recent memory, we've seen leagues that are just total misses, right? And that doesn't mean that the game is getting bad, right? I think this is the best retention league, and it comes like 2 or 3 leagues after one of the worst, right? So these guys know what they're doing. They're trying new things, and they know how to correct when they've taken the wrong direction.
And they also know how to kill their babies, which is a good thing.
Yeah,
so,
it takes a lot of heart to do it.
Yeah. All right, man. Really enjoyed the talk. I think that's about covered everything. If you guys want to check out Surge in general, I'll link the YouTube down below in the description. For everybody who's interested in builds, if you haven't seen him yet, I would definitely recommend checking out his videos. A very analytical approach, especially if you're an absolute nerd, you're going to like the videos. In general, thank you for coming, man. And yeah, appreciate what you do, man.
All right, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure.
All right, man. See ya.
Take care.